Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my Total War Warhammer 2 Likely Future DLC video. And in this video, I'm going to break down what I predict will be the likely DLC or even perhaps elements of free DLC that will come to us in Total War Warhammer 2. So the first thing and the biggest DLC packs and some of the things that you guys might be most looking forward to is the race DLC. Now, I've spoken about this a couple of times, so I'm just going to go over it briefly for anyone who's maybe new to my channel or new to any of my videos. So, the first game, Total War Warhammer, took place here in the old world. The second game is taking on a bit more of an ambitious area of territory, and that's looking to cover these areas here. Now, the old game, in terms of the races it introduced after the initial four, which were the Empire, the Vampire Counts, the Greenskins, and the Dwarves, were elements of the old world and exist very much there. But they also introduced the Beastmen, the Wood Elves, and Bretonnia. Again, very much established in the old world area. So we have to assume that geographically, Creative Assembly are going to look to introduce races that exist in this new area of the map they'll be exploring in Total War Warhammer 2. So, assuming that we're going to get roughly the same number of races, it opens up a slight conundrum for us. For Total War Warhammer 2, we're looking at the starting races of the High Elves who live on the island of Ulthuan, the Dark Elves who live in Nagash, the Lizard Men who live in Lustria and the Southlands, and Skaven who kind of live all over the place. Now, if we're looking at this area of the map as the map that will exist as, let's call it the Vortex map, which is the Total War Warhammer 2 campaign map, because we know there'll be a combined map if you own both versions of the game, which is very exciting, but we're going to focus on the second game's campaign map, which we'll call the Vortex map, which is the area in blue. Now, the races that exist in this map with army rulebooks, which exist in Warhammer Fantasy Battle, which is the game upon which Total War Warhammer is based, is really only the Tomb Kings, who exist in Neferata, which is kind of around the area of Araby, maybe slightly inland from there, one could argue. Now, the Tomb Kings are another undead faction, but very different from the Vampire Counts themselves. So the Tomb Kings is a shoo-in, I believe. So they'll exist in this general area. Now, there are some other races who haven't been added to Total War Warhammer yet that we think will probably be added. And those are the armies of Kislev, the armies of the Chaos Dwarves, which exist here in this brown box, which is the area of the Darklands, and the armies of the Ogre Kingdoms, which exist kind of towards the Darklands and in the mountainous areas around it. So, for the purpose of this, and sticking to geography of how this map might work in the second version of the game, I don't think we're going to see those races added. They're more likely to make an appearance in the third version of the game, which by rumor and by sort of a leak that went out early doors in terms of data mining Total War Warhammer 1, looks like it will take the factions of Chaos and split them into 4 different factions of the 4 Chaos Gods. So the demon armies of Chaos will make an appearance in the third iteration of the game, and they'll probably be located up around the Chaos Wasteland and the Northern Wastes, as you can see on the map here. They'll probably be the northern part and the eastern part of the old world map, maybe included just to tie in the World's Edge Mountains, maybe a bit of the Empire behind it, and to tie in Kislev into the region they'll be covering in Total War Warhammer 3. So if we rule out the Chaos Demons, the Chaos Dwarves, and the Ogre Kingdoms, now some have made the argument there's no reason Chaos Dwarves and Ogres can't come over and fight over the battle for the Vortex. And I say, yeah, there's no reason they wouldn't, but there's no reason they would either. And one could say they're trying to fight off chaos or encourage chaos in terms of the Chaos Dwarves. But really, it's just a bit of a push. I mean, if you're looking at the game and the map and you saw that 3 different races got added in the first version of the game, we assume 3 more will be added in the second version of the game, then bang, we've got 3 added in the third version of the game, which are Kislev, Chaos Dwarves, and Ogre Kingdoms as DLC to the 4 Chaos God factions who will make up the main part of that third game. So we've kind of got it all very much and neatly lined up for me. That's why I don't think we'll be seeing those areas covered in this game, and which gives me the reason to think why we'll get the races we'll get in the DLC for Total War Warhammer 2. So what are they, you may ask? The first is a lock for sure, Tomb Kings. Tomb Kings will appear. They have an army book. It'll be simple. I'll probably be doing a video on them at some point, but we're definitely going to get Tomb Kings, that's for sure. That's a lock. Now, the next ones with the world we're dealing with get a little bit tricky. Next to the Tomb Kings, we have the area of Araby. Now, Araby there was a big crusade element. There's been wars with the old world before, and Araby's had a long history in the Warhammer world, but it's also not been hugely expanded upon by Games Workshop. They have released a couple of units. There's a Regiment of Renown from Araby. There's a couple of characters who have joined other army books from Araby. But on the whole, they haven't really fleshed it out too much. They did give Araby a full army in a game called War Master, which tried to take the notion of Warhammer Fantasy battles and expand it out to a more epic scale. So all the units were kind of smaller and there'd be more giant units and things like that. So that was War Master. So there is kind of an army for that. And Creative Assembly could build on that army book and create the nation of Araby. I see Araby being most likely the faction to play a role similar to Bretonnia in Total War Warhammer 1, whereas at the beginning we'll get it'll be a human faction, won't be playable as a campaign faction at first, but they might expand it out towards the end of the life of that game and make Araby a playable faction. So that's kind of my thinking for Araby. Next up, we have the Dogs of War, which are kind of the mercenary armies, mostly associated with kind of Tilia, Estalia, perhaps the Border Princes region. Now, these guys could be folded into an army that acts very much like kind of a conquistador army of our world that make campaigns and forays over into the new world, trying to pillage Lustria, trying to pillage Ulthuan, trying to foolishly take Nagash, and that's how the Dogs of War armies could play a part in it. And there's a long history of mercenary armies coming to Lustria and trying to plunder it. So that would actually work very nicely for Total War Warhammer 2. Another race that plays a part is the Amazons. Now, I've already done a video on the Amazons, guys. Do check the top right-hand corner now, and that'll pop up a link to it, or just check the description, and there'll be a link to my video on the Amazons there. But one thing about the Amazons is that when they did feature in the tabletop, they were kind of just given rules through a monthly magazine. They were never given their own army book. They were sort of categorized, if you were to play them, as part of the Dogs of War book, which was kind of like a mercenary force, and regiments of it could be used in different armies as well. So that's how the Amazons would be played out. So they could technically be integrated into any Dogs of War army. And that kind of brings us to the three armies that we'll probably see in Total War Warhammer 2. So we've got the Tomb Kings. Locke, definitely a DLC race. Then I think we'll have the Dogs of War as a faction, or they'll just call it a mercenary faction, or I don't know what they'll end up calling it, but it'll be based on the Dogs of War book. And then towards the end of the life, we'll have Araby expanded out from a non-playable faction to a faction that we can use, perhaps even as a free LC towards the end of the life of the game. So we'd get Araby. And that's kind of the three races I see them adding. Of all the different areas, these three races, apart from the Tomb King, sort of the Dogs of War and Araby, haven't been terribly fleshed out by Games Workshop themselves. So that's why it makes it a little bit dodgy. But it would fit in the pattern with three different races for each of the trilogy of games being added on top of the four starting factions. So very much looking forward to that. That'd be very cool to see. So that's what my thinking is in terms of the races we'll see. Now moving on, apart from the races, I think what will feature maybe more prominently and give us a bit more avenue is the Lord packs for Total War Warhammer 2, because I think they'll serve two purposes. The Lord packs in Total War Warhammer 1 introduced us to Regiments of Renown, they gave us another Lord, and sometimes they added in some extra units from different factions as well. So we're going to try and play with that idea and see what we can come up with in terms of conflicts that exist in the lore and conflicts that exist along a certain theme, because that seems to be what Creative Assembly are really going for. They're looking to tie these packages together with two legendary lords who are in some kind of conflict attached by some kind of theme. So where we had Belegar and Skarsnik, who are fighting over 8 peaks, very lore heavy there. A lot of history, a lot of conflict between those two fighting over Belegar's old home. A known conflict, and very much in line with the lore. Then we also had the Grim in the Grave, which was Volkmar the Grim, and then we got Helman Gorst, which was a bit of a character slightly out of left field, a little bit less known character, but that kind of played to a theme of the undead versus humans, and they kind of just pulled that one together through a supplement book, a supplement campaign book that came out, and they used that as a source of material. So using the information we know about how they like to put together packs, I've put together the following list of DLC packs I think we'd like to see in terms of Lords. But in Total War Warhammer 2, another element I see them introducing with the Lord packs is that they'll use the Lord packs to reintroduce the old races from Total War Warhammer 1 to make them playable in the Vortex map for Total War Warhammer 2. So in the actual campaign map for Total War Warhammer 2, not the grand overarching world map that they'll put together from the two games, but in the campaign map we'll be able to play as greenskins, as the vampire counts, and these elements will be reintroduced through different lords coming in. That's my theory, at least, because they already have the armies. It's fairly easy to put together, and I don't think anyone would let, or Creative Assembly wouldn't do this themselves, of reintroducing the races in race packs and trying to resell you vampire counts or trying to resell you stuff like that. So that's my thinking, and that's how I've picked out this list for Total War Warhammer 2. Now the first couple I think are probably a lock, both in terms of lore and themes, and then from there it might get a little bit less likely, but I'll talk you through sort of how likely I think each option is to begin with. And the first option we're going to look at is the Prophet of Sotek, and the idea of the DLC package known as the Rat and the Serpent, or something along those lines. So to discuss the Prophet of Sotek, we kind of have to discuss who Sotek is. So the Lizard Men were created by, just to give you guys a brief bit of lore, we're not going to delve too deep into lore, and I've made videos on this already. If you want to get a bit more information on the Prophet of Sotek, do check the top right hand corner. That will take you to my likely legendary lords for the Lizard Men video, and I've done a bit more in depth on him there. But essentially, the Lizard Men were created by a race known as the Old Ones. The Lizard Men believed the Old Ones could see the future, and they wrote down their plans on plaques and left it to the Lizard Men just before they disappeared as the two polar gates exploded that they'd built, and chaos erupted into the Warhammer world for the first time, looking to destroy everything in its path. Obviously, all the races of order fought back and managed to survive and have so far kept chaos at bay with the use of the Vortex, which is the main campaign mechanic in Total War Warhammer 2. So one of these plaques was located in a city, I think, called Chalqua, if I remember correctly. This is kind of just off the top of my head, so forgive me if I get any of the details slightly off here. But they had plaques that said was from a god called Sotek, who was the Serpent god. And he said there'll be a great plague and there'll be rat men who invade and they become great threat to lizard men people. But don't worry, this kind of all has to happen, for if you pledge to Sotek, he will rise and save the lizard men and they'll be stronger for it. And then for centuries and centuries and centuries, the lizard men ignore this because there's never been any evidence of this, and this is the only city that has this plaque. Whereas other plaques written by the Old Ones, there tend to be duplicates in multiple different Lizard Men cities, so they can kind of compare and contrast notes and say, oh, this is quite likely, there's sort of 3 copies of this prophecy, so this is likely to happen. But for the Sotek one, they only had 1 set of plaques that ever said it. And lo and behold, a great plague starts to sweep across Lizard Men, and Lizard Men are like, oh, this was written about in the prophecy of Sotek. And so one of the skink priests managed to dig out the prophecy, and they started to investigate it, and they went around looking around the jungle for these potential rat men that the prophecy spoke of. They found them. It was Clan Pestilence, who had built a home in Lustria and had began to start a campaign against the lizard men, the first step being the spreading of this plague. Clan Pestilence soon marched against Chalqua and overran the city. It was too devastated by plague at this point. And the little skink priest known as Tehanuin, I think that's how you pronounce it, Tehanuin said, okay guys, this is the prophecy of Sotek. We have to spread the word and get everyone to start praising Sotek so he can deliver us from this Skaven plague and this Skaven rat men and save our lives because we're just being destroyed. And he went around telling everyone they had to start sacrificing, making living sacrifices to Sotek. And at first people were skeptical, but they couldn't deny the prophecy spoke of the plague and the prophecy spoke of the rat men. So they started to follow him, and indeed, particularly amongst skinks, Sotek picked up a big following, And it essentially comes down to a final battle at the Guacamole crater. And at this crater, the Prophet of Sotek turns up with an army, and the twin-tailed comet goes across the sky, much like the one spoken about Sigmar. The Prophet sees this not as a kind of twin-tailed comet, but as the forked tongue of a serpent being represented in the sky. He makes a huge amount of Skaven sacrifices to Sotek, and indeed the jungle comes alive, and the floor of the jungle just becomes alive with serpents, and the serpents start to wipe out the Skaven army. They fight the Skaven to the coast. Clan Pestilence at this point, being led by Nurglitch, their clan leader, escapes to the coast, sacrificing their own guys to try and delay the Skaven army, not by, brave self-sacrifice, but by essentially tricking units to stay behind and running off away and onto the coast, onto the shore. The Prophet of Sotek's army eventually gets to the shore. This is where stuff really kicks off, and it said that those who were at the shore that day saw a massive serpent erupt out of a volcano, go into the sea, and presumably chase down and kill the rest of the Skaven army. This was a campaign that lasted an astonishingly long amount of time. This was a devastating war against Skaven, and is a huge conflict set up in the Lizardmen lore. The Prophet of Sotek, I don't think, will be one of the starting legendary lords in Total War Warhammer for the Lizardmen. He'll be a DLC package, and he'll be teamed with Lord Nurglitch. At least in my opinion, Lord Nurglitch, who is the leader of Clan Pestilence, and is very much, just kind of a grotty guy. Not very pleasant. He has his tenant there, Bilios, and he rides on a giant mutated rat known simply as Pox. He's known to have established Clan Pestilence as one of the most powerful Skaven clans, and indeed, thanks to his interference, Clan Pestilence now sits on the Council of 13, which is the ruling council of the entirety of Skavendom. So he's very much leader of Clan Pestilence, and this conflict between the Lizardmen and Clan Pestilence is just bang on. It's perfect for a DLC pack, and it's a perfect conflict to introduce these two legendary lords. What else might we get in this pack, apart from the Prophet of Sotek and Lord Nurglitch? Now, some have argued, because there is a character who appears in the Skaven army books, the later ones, who is attached to Clan Pestilence, and indeed is Lord Nurglitch's primary agent. And the argument could be made that Lord Nurglitch would be sitting on the Council of 13, and it would be this agent who leads the armies against the Prophet of Sotek. I don't necessarily think that's the case, because my thinking is that Creative Assembly for this particular DLC pack will take a book released by Games Workshop, just known, I think it was just entitled Lustria, and it was kind of a layout about how to conduct a campaign, sort of ongoing battles with your friends or whatever in Lustria, with the Prophet of Sotek and Clan Pestilence, and rules were given for Nurglitch and rules were given for the Prophet of Sotek as the two leading lights in that conflict. And much like the Grim and the Grave DLC took its influence from a supplement, I think this one will be mostly informed by the Lustria campaign supplement as well. So I think that's how this campaign is going to go. Now, that other character is known as Lord Skrull, and he's an interesting guy. He's a Plague Monk, which is kind of a specialized unit of Clan Pestilence, and he loves Lord Nurglitch. He loves Lord Nurglitch and his corruption and his foulness so much that he said when he first saw Lord Nurglitch, he ripped out his own eyes. So there you go, very dedicated follower of Lord Nurglitch, and there is a possibility he could be included perhaps as the free LC character in Total War Warhammer when they release this pack, this Rat and the Serpent pack. That's a possibility, but it might be somebody else as well. But that's something to look out for. It might be Skrulk, but my money's on Nurglitch. I may be proven wrong. Let me know what you think in the comments. We'll wait and see. We could also get some units. Now, some people are quite afraid that all of the Clan Pestilence units will be held back from the Skaven army so they can be included in this very likely DLC. And that is a distinct possibility, because Skaven does have a number of options in its armies, but it's quite a large amount of troops to put aside just for Clan Pestilence. So we might have some of them incorporated into the Skaven army at release, and then some pulled back. But I just thought I'd give you guys an outline of all of the Clan Pestilence related units, at least in the most recent editions of the Skaven book. So what we have are the Plague Priests, which are a hero unit. We also have the Plague Furnace, which is a mount, essentially, for the Plague Priests. And it can be devastating, and that has a number of different effects on the battlefield. I'll go into this in a bit more detail when I get round to my Skaven army book. But I don't really want to cover it too much now. This video will overrun terribly if I go through every unit in too much detail. We also have the Plague Monks. We have the Plague Censer Bearers. We also have the Plague Claw Catapult. Now, all of these units may or may not be included, but we'll get at least the ones of these that aren't included in the game out of the box will probably be included with this downloadable content pack. In terms of the Lizard Men, there's a few units like closely associated with Sotek and the worship of Sotek. One of them is the Ark of Sotek mounted on a Bastillodon. Now, I cover the Bastillodons and the armies of Lizardmen in a bit more detail in my Lizardmen army video. Do check the right-hand corner now, or do check the description if you want to find out more about their units and their army in its entirety. But the Ark of Sotek essentially spews out snakes, very much dedicated with the theme of Sotek, the Serpent God. And we've seen the other formation, the other variation of Bastillodon, which is essentially mounted with a big diamond or crystal that focuses the sun's light into an intense laser beam, or sunbeam, shall we say. And we've seen that in concept art, and we've seen the developers talk about that unit in particular. So we know that Bastillodon would be included, but we haven't seen anything on the Ark of Sotek yet. So there is a distinct possibility that the Ark of Sotek won't be released until this DLC pack is released. So that's one of the options of the units they might only release with the Prophet of Sotek pack, and very much fits into the theme of the DLC pack as a whole. Skink Chiefs are also something that might be included in the Rat and the Serpent DLC. Skink Chiefs are technically a hero unit in Lizardmen armies. They're not generals necessarily. But I think with the introduction of the Prophet of Sotek as a general, Creative Assembly might look to include a kind of Prophet of Sotek template to transfer over to a more generic general, which making it a skink general, who maybe backs skinks up, makes them a bit more powerful, not unlike Skarsnik did for Gobbos in Total War Warhammer 1. The other, I'd argue, is maybe the Jungle Swarm. Now, the Jungle Swarm is technically made out of serpents and lizards, but the Jungle Swarm is essentially the idea of this moving carpet of living things that the Prophet of Sotek used to fight off all the Skaven those years ago. It's just kind of this moving carpet of snakes is the idea of the Jungle Swarm. So we may only get the Jungle Swarm introduced with this DLC pack as well. And I imagine we'll get Regiments of Renown for both the Skaven and the Lizardmen in this pack. So we'll get those Regiments of Renown, they'll be covered, and that's kind of how this pack would go. So that's really all the units and things I see happening in the Rat and the Serpent DLC. And let me know if you guys agree or disagree with me on that one. The next one I put in, just in terms of likelihood and fitting in lore-wise almost perfectly, is my notion, which I've raised in my High Elf videos, and I think with my video with Lionheart as well, is the idea of Eltharion and Grom the Paunch. Now, Eltharion was an elven hero who went on a campaign to Nagash, fought the Dark Elves for a good long time, sort of had some success at campaign, but eventually got wounded by a poisoned blade, had to come back to Ulthuan. When he returned, he found his kind of kingdom that he lived in under siege, but he was still feverish and delirious, and he didn't really know what was going on. His father had ridden out to meet Grom, which had spent some time rampaging around the old world and had been the first war to arrive on the shores of Ulthuan, being led by Grom himself and a sorcerer known as Blacktooth. So Grom and the sorcerer start about rampaging and pillaging and destroying sections of Ulthuan, and on their way they're destroying the Waystones, which are holding in place the vortex, which is sucking in all excess chaos magic into the world and essentially stopping the end of the world. Now, you might be like, oh, that sounds very much like the kind of thing we'll be doing on the campaign of Total War Warhammer 2, and you wouldn't be wrong. That's why I think this is such a good fit. So, Eltharion being poisoned and delirious, his father goes out to meet Grom. His father loses against the sheer numbers that Grom has. His father dies. Eltharion gets a vision from his father explaining the situation, explaining who Grom is, and then disappears. And Eltharion wakes up from this vision, being miraculously healed. Where his father was standing in the room during his vision is the old family heirloom sword. He picks it up and marches to war against Grom. Before he can meet Grom in combat, his younger brother meets Grom, and Grom kills his younger brother too. So Eltharion loses his father, his younger brother, and is pillaging Eltharion's homeland. So Eltharion's pretty pissed at Grom at this point. So he goes and vows to fight against him. Eltharion arrives with an army of reinforcements as Grom is pillaging a elven city and manages to kill Blacktooth, the greenskin sorcerer, and liberate the city from Grom's war. Now, to get a bit more detailed of this, check my Missing Legendary Lords for the Greenskin video, again in the top right-hand corner or in the description, for a full rundown of exactly what Grom the Paunch's story is. And if you want a bit more detail on Eltharion as well, check my recent High Elf video. I'll put that in the description below too. And that kind of gives you an idea of the conflict between these two and what's been going on, and why there's a clash, a necessarily clash that could be happening between them. And it really fits in lore-wise. It fits in a way as well, because Eltharion, after he fought off Grom, took a vendetta against all greenskins, and in fact had a campaign across to the Badlands to try and stop any future wars arriving in Ulthuan. He eventually realized that doing this only kind of encourages greenskins. If you start slaughtering them, they just get more revved up and gather in greater numbers and come charging at you over and over again. So he promptly abandoned that, but that was an idea, and there could be quite a neat mechanic about early doors in Eltharion's campaign. You're up against Grom quite a lot. Grom eventually disappears off, and maybe the idea is that Grom reestablishes himself in the Badlands. They take Eltharion over there, maybe just at the very top bit of Araby in the Total War Warhammer 2 Vortex map, or in a grand campaign map, in terms of combining the two maps. Eltharion could easily go into the Badlands and end his quest there, maybe with a huge fight against Grom the Paunch in the Badlands. Something like that. It offers a slightly different mechanic, and that's what Creative Assembly seem to like to do with their Legendary Lords who they add in DLC packs later on. Grom himself could be heavily involved in the destroying of the Vortex mechanic that looks likely to be happening in Total War Warhammer 2 as well, because that's what he was actually doing. He was going around destroying Waystones, was about to unleash chaos upon the world once more, but Eltharion stopped him. So that's why I think these two fit perfectly as a Legendary Lord pack. Now, in terms of some units that they could be added to, that we could see as, well, described as free DLC, but just kind of part of this pack as well. With Eltharion, he has an item on his person that allows him to, he's a warrior at heart, he's not really a mage. He has an item on him that allows him to become, I think it's a level 2 mage on the tabletop. This idea of a warrior who kind of can be a mage as well, rather than necessarily just a mage you want to keep out of melee combat, is quite common in the High Elf armies. And indeed, they have a general type known as the Loyal Masters of Hoeth, who have mastered the skills of swordplay as well as the ways of magic. These guys have a unique kind of lore of magic as well. Well, not lore, but the magic they learn is, each lore of magic in the Warhammer world has something called a signature spell, which is a spell that the lore of magic is particularly known for. But these guys know all the signature spells, no other spells necessarily, but all the signature spells of the 8 Lords of Magic. So they have 8 spells to use if you had them fully upgraded. And that's what the Lore Masters of Hoeth are. Now, I can see them not necessarily making it as a starting general type in Total War Warhammer 2, but with the introduction of Eltharion as this kind of warrior mage, it would tie them together. Now, lore-wise, the Lore Masters of Hoeth and Eltharion aren't the most closely connected, but I think just to go on with the theme of the warrior mage, and the fact that the Lore Masters may not be added as a starting general would really tie those two aspects up nicely, and it's something I can see Creative Assembly doing. And Eltharion himself has a Griffin mount, so we might see the introduction of Griffins into the High Elf army with this add-on as well, not necessarily having them included, because the High Elves have a lot of mount options for their lords and mages, so they might not necessarily be included at the beginning, but we might get Griffins introduced with Eltharion. You never know, it's just a minor prediction. In terms of the greenskins, there are still some missing greenskin units from Total War Warhammer 1 that haven't been added to the game yet. The greenskins have a bolt thrower known as the Goblin Spear Chucker. Now, this could easily be added. Most of Grom the Paunch's war was made out of gobos, so the Spear Chucker, run by a gobbo crew, could be very much a unit just to, you know, actually just finish off the greenskin armies, gives them an excuse to spend some money on it, make the models, make the greenskin Spear Chucker, add that to the options for the greenskins, and that could be part of the Grom the Paunch army upgrades. And we could, fingers crossed, see Snotlings. Now, Snotlings are the kind of scrawniest, smallest type of greenskin, and they'd be very much cannon fodder units, but they also have access to a very fun unit known as the Snotling Pump Wagon, which is essentially just powered by Snotlings moving around on some pumps and just charges into battle in as a kind of chariot. So if we could get the Goblin Spear Chucker and the Snotlings thrown into the Grom the Paunch pack, DLC pack, that would be great and a fantastic addition to the Total War Warhammer universe. So that's my thinking for the Eltharion and the Grom pack. As you guys know who are regular viewers of my videos, I think that one should be called the Grim and the Green, in sort of a honor of their first DLC, which was the Grim and the Grave. Some people have said that it'll be called the Grim and the Grom, which I suppose is okay sounding as well. But you never know. It'll be named something along those lines, and is a perfect option for a DLC pack. Reintroduces the greenskins, very much a lore conflict, ties onto a theme of conflict, and we get the greenskins reintroduced into the campaign map of Total War Warhammer 2. Moving on to a pack that a lot of people put a lot of credit into out there. Now, lore-wise, this is perhaps one of the weaker combinations, but that's the idea of Hellebron and Alarielle. Hellebron herself is the leader of the Cult of Cain, which is the primary elven god that the Dark Elves worship. If you watch my Dark Elves Legendary Lord video, do check the description for that. I discussed a lot more about Cain and his role in Dark Elf society, but suffice it to say, she's leader of the Cult of Cain. Essentially, she's the Pope for the Dark Elves, but with a lot more murdering and beheading and sacrificing. And she is old, but sometimes a year she bathes in blood and becomes young again and beautiful. She's very much obsessed with this idea of beauty, and she's upset at Morathi, who's probably going to be one of the starting legendary lords for the Dark Elves. And very upset at Morathi because Morathi won't tell her all the secrets of the blood magic that Morathi uses to stay young and beautiful. So there's some conflict there between the two Dark Elf factions. And I think Hellebron, when introduced, will very much be the Cult of Cain faction and have her own starting position and be a separate faction for the Dark Elves. Now, the Everqueens, there have been a long line of Everqueens throughout Elven history, but suffice it to say she's essentially the Queen of the Elves. She gains her power from the land of Ulthuan itself. Very powerful magic user, and these would be kind of the two legendary lords that would face off against each other in this pack. There's not a huge amount of history of conflict between Hellebron directly and the Everqueen. It's not like Morathi and the Everqueen, because they have a lot of conflict with each other. And it's not like Hellebron and Morathi, because they have a lot of conflict with each other. One could say that Hellebron, being obsessed with beauty, is upset that the Everqueen, who is renowned the world over for being stunningly beautiful, just makes her mad. And so that's why they go into conflict. Now, a thing I think is important to point out is that if Creative Assembly only follow exactly the path that they did for Total War Warhammer 1, the two most likely Legendary Lord packs will be the Rat and the Serpent and this one, rather than Eltharion, because the Rat and the Serpent allows you to give Regiments of Renown to the Skaven and to the Lizardmen, and this one allows you to give Regiments of Renown to the Dark Elves and the High Elves. So I would actually guess that those two would be the first two released by Creative Assembly. Eltharion might come a little bit later to reintroduce the Greenskins as a playable faction in Total War Warhammer 2. Also, this pack makes a little bit less lore-wise sense than the Eltharion pack, but as I say, this pack, just because it fits that nice little package that they did in the first game of the two factions facing off against each other, may be the second one or the first one, rather than the Eltharion, the Grim and the Green one. Now, considering the Queen and the Hag and the Rat and the Serpent would provide all of the starting factions of Total War Warhammer 2 with Regiments of Renown, if they follow the exact same path of Total War Warhammer 1 in terms of their DLC plans, these will be the only two DLC Lord packs we get. I'm not saying they'll be the only two Lords we get, because other Lords have been thrown in there. As free downloadable content or whatever have you. But I really hope they go a little bit further and do look to include some other Legendary Lord packs. I'd hate to see Grom the Paunch not make an appearance against Eltharion. I think that would be a horribly missed opportunity. I think that would be a fun lore pack. So in terms of this pack with the Queen and the Hag, what can we look forward to in terms of units added? Now, this is assuming that these units aren't included in the game to start with. So let's have a look. On the Queen side, we will have the Handmaidens of the Everqueen. These guys are essentially the protectors of the Everqueen. There are 100 of them at any one time. They're essentially her personal bodyguard. The Handmaidens, they are a hero in Warhammer itself. So they'll be a hero unit, if not a general unit. So these guys are a hero unit that might be introduced along with the Everqueen in Total War Warhammer 2. Handmaidens themselves are the best of the best from a unit known as the Sisters of Avalon, who are kind of handpicked as truly gifted female warriors from the ranks of the citizen militia of High Elf society. So the Sisters of Avalon very much, again, are tied directly to the Everqueen in terms of their relationship and what they do in the High Elf army. So I can see these guys not necessarily being included in the starting game, but coming along a little bit later. For a bit more detail on these girls, do check my army units video for the High Elves, again in the top right hand corner, or if not, there in the description. As for Hellebron, she will have a hero unit, maybe to mirror the introduction of the handmaidens of the Death Hags. Now these are essentially the elite of the Witch Elves. We've seen Witch Elves in the trailer for Total War Warhammer 2 at this point, so we know they'll be part of the game, but the Death Hags could be the hero unit to counter the introduction of the handmaiden on the side of the High Elves. Now in terms of her other units, now a lot of aspects are tied to their loyalty to the cult of Cain. The Witch Elves are technically, as are the Cainite Assassins, who are the Assassins Guild, essentially, of Dark Elf society. But another unit tied to them are the Executioners, who go around with massive greatswords that they forged themselves, and are a very elite unit. Now, I don't think the Executioners will be included as part of this DLC, because I think they're too iconic not to have as a starting faction in the High Elf army, but you never know, they might be not included to start with and be included in this DLC pack. But I just think they're a little bit too high profile. But I thought I'd mention it because they are directly under the control of Hellebron. Like, they follow her orders. They're a faction and a regiment formed under her leadership. So it makes sense for them to be included when she's included into Total War Warhammer 2. And another unit that may be added if it doesn't make it into the starting game is the Cauldron of Blood. Essentially, it gives a lot of buffs to units around it. And it's essentially a death chariot propelled by magic, ridden on by witch elves. And again, witch elves very much tied to the cult of Cain. And for more details on the sort of the units tied to the cult of Cain and stuff like that, do check my Dark Elf army video. But this is a unit that I can see being maybe a bit too elaborate for them to include in the starting faction army, but very much one of the kind of more intricate things that could be included in the DLC pack. Now, as we know, with a lot of the DLC packs, there was a bit of free LC content that went along with it. Now, my big hope for the free LC content in Total War Warhammer 2 is the introduction of Alarielle as a legendary lord, and it goes along with the theme of kind of like powerful women, of like beauty in powerful women and things like that, because Alarielle, despite the model not necessarily looking like the most attractive woman in the world, is renowned for her beauty as well. She is the queen of the Wood Elves and plays a hugely important part in Wood Elf society. She's also the avatar of the elven god Isha, and Isha's power is slightly related to, if not tied to, the Everqueen as well. So there's a relationship there. Alarielle is also known to have led an expedition against the High Elves and the Dark Elves in Warhammer lore. When Morathi, the very famous Dark Elf character, plotted to have Alarielle's sister killed, Alarielle was enraged and went on a campaign. She at first thought the High Elves were responsible, so spent some time rampaging around there, then eventually found out it was Morathi, so went up and rampaged against the Dark Elves. So she does have some history of invading the New World, and that's why I think she'd be a fantastic character in Total War Warhammer 2. And most of the Wood Elf army is actually fleshed out, so you wouldn't necessarily need to include any extra units. You just have to make her character model as the free LC for the Queen and the Hag DLC. And there's only one unit I think missing from the Dark Elf roster, at least as far as 8th edition is concerned, and that's the Shadow Dancer, a War Dancer unit which could go in and obviously melee focused, but not hugely essential for them to add, I don't necessarily think, just a cool little add-on. But that's really the only unit missing from the Wood Elf army, as long as we're not including like, oh hey, they haven't put in any regiment of renown for the Wood Elves, and that is true, but I'm not sure we'll ever see that because of the no DLC for DLC policy that Creative Assembly have currently. They could expand out the roster of the Wood Elves that would fit perfectly in with this pack, with Alarielle, Queen of the Wood Elves. We'd see her in the game. She's a hugely important character as far as Wood Elves concerned, intrinsic to all of their lore and their history. So I think she'd be a perfect 3LC addition to that DLC pack. Fingers crossed for that one. Next up, we have one of my more out there packs that aren't necessarily tied together by lore, but are tied together with a theme, is Pirates and Raiders, or Pirates of the New World, or Raiders of the New World, or something along those lines, is sort of around Pirates and Raiders. Now, my first thought on this pack was that we'll have Lokhir Fellheart included, although I know those of you are going to mention in the comments he's technically a hero in the Dark Elf army. And we'll see the character Lokhir Fellheart added. He's one of the primary Reavers within Dark Elf society. He heads up a fleet. He's notoriously known on the high seas. And we'd see the introduction of Luthor Harkon, the vampire pirate captain with his zombie crew. Now, Luthor Harkon is a pirate who raids the vampire coast and has raised a huge army in that area of the world, and he's mainly driven by pride and greed. And I'll get into a bit more of the lore of Luthor Harkon, but he'd be a fantastic way to introduce the vampire counts into Total War Warhammer. He was a vampire given the blood kiss by Galrauch, one of the most famous vampires in the lore, if not necessarily on the tabletop itself, but one of the most famous vampires in the lore. And yeah, he is a notorious character around the New World and a fantastic way to reintroduce vampire counts into Total War Warhammer 2. He could also come along and complete the vampire count list. I believe all we're missing really at the moment is the Kenwraith Hero unit and the Spirit Host unit. There is the Abyssal Terror, but that's more of a mount, and I think they'd be more hard-pressed to introduce that into Total War Warhammer 2. But apart from that, it's really only these two units, and they could be included in with Luthor Harkon. The Spirit Host is essentially a ghost, kind of cannon foddery, but they're ethereal, so they can maybe soak up quite a bit of damage. Not necessarily the most elite unit, but, you know, an interesting addition to the Vampire Count army roster if they ever get round to adding it, and this would be a golden opportunity for them to do so. Now, Lokhir Fellheart, again, as I said, renowned pirate, known Reaver, actually, you know, considered well, apart from the murdering, pillaging, and raping and stuff, considered quite a decent bloke for Dark Elves. He didn't kill his father to gain his position, which is a rarity. He just kind of inherited it. Actually liked his father, which is strange in Dark Elf society. But, you know, a renowned pirate. He's cloaked himself in the skin of a sea monster, and he has that cool mask of a kraken. Very cool, built for the high seas. And particularly if we're going to see naval mechanics introduced, it'd be nice to have a DLC pack around that, if not introduced, of course, because we know we're not getting naval combat itself, but we'll see a DLC pack around these naval characters. Now, with the introduction of Lokhir Fellheart, we'd also maybe get some more units from the Dark Elf army roster added, which are the Black Ark Fleet Masters and the Black Ark Corsairs. All of these units are very much tied to warfare combat on the seas for the Dark Elves, and I can see them not necessarily being included in the starting armies for the Dark Elves. These units perhaps more than most, because if there's no naval combat, like Black Ark Corsairs and Fleet Masters, it's a bit weird having units called that, unless you do maybe this DLC pack based around these very famous naval characters and how they might work in Total War Warhammer 2. So I see those units being added along with Lokhir Fellheart, but there is a third option I want to throw into the sort of the mix here. Now, I think this pack, if they ever make a Pirates and Raiders themed pack, could include Wulfrick the Wanderer, the famous Norscan Chaos Lord, who I covered thoroughly in my Missing Legendary Lords Chaos Edition video. Do again, check it out in the description. But he has a magical boat that can teleport around. But again, he's Norscan. He loves raiding and pillaging and challenging legendary lords to combat and sort of executing them. He's really been cursed or blessed by the Chaos Gods with almost infinite languages, just so he can insult people in their native tongue, so they feel forced to fight him in a one-on-one duel, which, given his skill in combat, they almost invariably lose. But Wulfrick's a kick-ass character. Get his full lore story in my other video. I do recommend you check it out. But I think it could be any combination of those three in terms of two of them, and one of them's a free LC Lord. And I think that would just be really cool to see, and also a good way to get Chaos back into Total War Warhammer 2 as a playable faction on that campaign map. Now, in terms of Chaos, there are still some holes in that army. Now, I'm going to put aside some of the missing units in the Chaos army that can be directly tied to one of the Chaos Gods, because on the assumption that they'll use those units in the armies of the split of Chaos Divided along the lines of the 4 Chaos powers. So I'm just kind of assuming that they're not going to include them until that time. But even with that said, there are still some units that can be included. One of them being the Chaos War Shrine, which allows you to have buffs. I covered it in my Missing Units for Total War Warhammer video. Again, guys, if you haven't seen that before, do check the description. That could be a cool unit carried around by 2 giants. Could be absolutely fantastic to see in Total War Warhammer 2. There's also the unit that I'm most looking forward to seeing in Chaos Undivided, which is the Slaughter Brute and the Mutalith Vortex Beast. Now, these guys are just monstrosities. Yeah, they could easily make an appearance in Total War Warhammer 2, fingers crossed. or they may just be holding out on all Chaos stuff until the third iteration of the game. But these guys aren't, like the Slaughter Brute and the Chaos Shrine isn't tied to a specific god, unlike some of the other units missing currently from Total War Warhammer in the Chaos Army. So these guys are fairly neutral that way, and I think should be included before that third game, hopefully. And Wulfrick being reintroduced could be a fantastic way to do that. Now, whatever combination, I think there will be a Pirate and Raiders DLC, but I'm not sure of the exact combination they use for that, as I mentioned before. It could be any of those three, any two of those three that I mentioned above. But I also think at that point, we might see a new hero introduced for the High Elf army, which is the Sea Helm. From the Lothran Sea Guard, very much the High Elves equivalent of the, kind of the High Elf equivalent of the Black Ark Corsairs, the Sea Guard. They're as comfortable fighting on ships as they are on land. They're very much built for sea warfare and are used to it. And the Sea Helms are kind of the best of them. So the Sea Helms could be introduced along with this Pirate and Raiders pack, whatever form that eventually takes. But this is kind of, as I said, going down this list of DLCs, we're getting more and more speculative as we go. But I do see them doing something around high seas and, pirates and stuff. And it'd be great to see Luthor Harkon added as well as Wulfrick particularly. So moving on to the next DLC pack that I think might possibly make an appearance. Now this one's a bit random. There's no real reason to group these together other than they're both very well liked characters. And there's not really another pairing I can think of that's better suited. And we could maybe have a DLC pack called The Shadow and the Demon. And that would involve the reintroduction of Alith and Malus Darkblade. Now, Malus is probably, after Hellebron, the next most likely legendary lord to be introduced into the Dark Elves. Now, if this was to actually come about, though, what we'd see, we've already got, so we have Tyrion and Teclis for the High Elves. That would then bring in the Everqueen for that pack that I thought would probably be the most next likely for the High Elves. So the Everqueen is their third one. And then I still like Eltharion with the Grim and the Grom, so that's 4 already. And then Alith would be the 5th, and that's quite a lot. We did have 5 for the vampire counts in the last game, so maybe it's not out of the realm of possibility, and this would be the 4th one for the Dark Elves. So not necessarily highest on the list, but you could put them together, and plus it's a cool name, it's a cool sounding name for a DLC, The Shadow and the Demon. I think that one goes quite well. Malus Darkblade has an entire series of books written about his adventures. Malus, having this book series dedicated to them, has a lot of lore, which I may well cover at some point. But to make a long story short, he becomes possessed, he goes on a great adventure where he's given a year to go around the world collecting the artifacts for this demon. And that's really how he might play into Total War Warhammer 2. But because he's kind of invading the Chaos Wastes, he might also just be introduced in the third iteration of the game as kind of a Dark Elf introduction to the third iteration of the game. But who knows? But Malus Darkblade, that's who he is. He's essentially a possessed Dark Elf. But he goes through a number of adventures and is very well liked. So I can see him making an appearance in Total War Warhammer 2, albeit maybe as the 4th legendary lord for the Dark Elves. And as I said, it's a shoddy theme, but it sounds cool, The Shadow and the Demon. But yeah, again, one of the less likely Legendary Lord DLC packs between him and Alith. So Alith essentially was the ruler of Nagash, which is where Malekith, the king of the Dark Elves, was running his kingdom when he first rebelled against the kind of order of princes, against the High Elves, essentially, and then was eventually chased off. But those lands became eventually known as the Shadowlands, and they fell under the kingship of Alith, who took a vow to massacre any Dark Elves he could ever find, one of the best warriors to have walked the earth. But he disappeared many centuries ago, but it's said there are rumors and speculation that he's still around. So in terms of the units that could be introduced in this pack, if they're not introduced in the starting faction for the High Elves, is really the most tied to Alith is the Shadow Warriors, really. They are kind of like him, they are skirmishers, they have scout, they essentially have Stalk in Total War Warhammer 2 as archers and not terrible melee combatants either. So those are the Shadow Warriors. As far as units tied directly to Malus Darkblade, I'm less sure really. There's nothing really that I can sort of tie directly to him, except as to say that maybe when he does come out, he'd have a particular focus on boosting cavalry for the Dark Elf army. That could be his particular upgrade tree and maybe slightly unique to him. So that's what Darkblade could have. Alternatively, Darkblade and Alith more likely might be up as, I think, individually free downloadable content lords for other packs. I'm not sure which packs those might be, or maybe just free along the way, you never know. just released along with different laws of magic or something along those lines. I'm not 100% sure, but this pack is one of the ones I'm least certain on. And that's my thinking behind it. They'll probably be included as legendary lords, but these units will probably come with them. And at some point they'll be tied in, but not necessarily as a pack together. Although I do like the name of the Shadow and the Demon, as I've said before. Moving on to the last pack I was going to suggest today, and that is Imrik of Khalida, who is the Prince of Khalida, which is a region of Ulthuan, which is the home of the High Elves, known particularly for breeding dragon riders and riding dragons and being known for their ability to wake dragons from their deep slumber to fight alongside the High Elves in the Old Alliance. And it's him versus Galrauch. Now, Galrauch was at one point a high dragon fighting alongside the elves when the great catastrophe happened and chaos first erupted into the Warhammer world. He was one of the best dragon fighters, and he at some point devoured whole greater demon of change, and this demon corrupted him and started to take over his body to such an extent that Galrauch's head split in two and became almost two different entities. On one side you had the demon who Galrauch had ingested, and on the other side you had his old noble dragon self. And the two sometimes squabble and fight, but that he is himself a legendary lord for the armies of chaos. So as far as sort of Imrik of Khalida goes, he didn't make it into the 8th edition of the High Elf Army book, but he is a well-liked character and well-known. So Imrik and the sort of dragon theme could tie these two legendary lords together. Imrik himself is descendant from Khalida the Conqueror, one of the Phoenix Kings, and, you know, he has a long line. He has the gift of his bloodline of being able to wake and kind of commune with dragons and have himself be able to ride one. And in terms of the units that could be included with the inclusion of an Imrik pack, if they're not already in the High Elf army, would be the Dragon Mage, which are also specialized mages which come from Khalida. It's said at some point they have a dream, and in that dream they see themselves flying a red dragon, and this kind of changes their entire personalities. They become very rash, very relentless, and mount upon the dragons themselves. And so these are essentially dragon-mounted mages, and they should be, if they stick true to the tabletop, the only elven mages who are allowed to have dragons as a mount in Total War Warhammer 2. The other one could be the Dragon Princes of Khalida, but as I mentioned earlier with the Hellebron armies and the Executioners, these guys are too iconic, I think, not to be included in the starting army for the High Elves, but because they are tied to Khalida, and that's the region Imrik would come from, there's a possibility, but I doubt it. That's just putting it out there so you guys know that these guys are also from Khalida and thematically could be tied into Imrik, but too iconic not to be included in Total War Warhammer, I think. As far as Galrauch goes, Galrauch, Chaos Legendary Lord, as I said before, same units as I proposed for Wulfrick. The Slaughter Brute and the Chaos Shrine could be included if he's the vessel by which Chaos is reintroduced as a starting faction in Total War Warhammer 2. Now, the name for this one, I rather jokingly had in my own head as the Dance of Dragons, named after, well, you guys will know what the Dance of Dragons is named after. And yeah, so that could just be a dragon-themed DLC pack. But as I said before, I'm going down these in what I think are the most likely to least likely in terms of things that stay strong with lore, things that Creative Assembly are likely to do, stuff they tie into. And this dragon one, Galrauch is known, but not necessarily the most loved Chaos Lord. I think people would prefer to see Wulfrick. So will they introduce 2 Chaos Lords in Total War Warhammer 2? I don't know. I couldn't tell you. The next thing I want to talk about isn't really a DLC pack. It's more of a conflict that I think needs to be addressed in the next game. And that is a conflict between Neferata, the mother of all vampires, and Khalida. And Khalida, the Tomb Queen, if you will. So these two, back in the ancient days, in the heydays of Neferata, were cousins, in fact. And they knew each other very well growing up. And Neferata, as many of you may know from my Missing Legendary Lords Vampire Count video, went on and sort of started to study the teachings of Nagash, who had been the first necromancer and had been defeated before, but had left his teachings of necromancy. And Neferata began to explore this and accidentally invented vampires, making herself the first vampire. She started to consolidate power in her home of Lamia and began to kind of turn the most important and influential people, really making it the first kind of kingdom ruled over by vampires. Now, Khalida, her cousin, who was a well-renowned warrior in her own right, as was Neferata. They'd sort of trained from birth in the ways of martial arts. And she started to become suspicious. So Neferata at a banquet challenged Khalida and promptly stabbed her through the stomach, which would inevitably lead to her death. Neferata bit her on the neck and then bit her own tongue, hoping to give her the blood kiss. But Khalida prayed to her goddess, Asp, I think is how you say it, the goddess of asps, the snakes, and said, please don't let me succumb to this vile curse that has taken my cousin. And indeed it said that the god spared her that fate, and she didn't, despite receiving the blood kiss, did not become a vampire, but did die. She was entombed, but rose again with the Tomb Kings, and now is said to sit on her throne, sort of coming to life whenever Neferata is under threat. But suffice it to say that the two had a combative relationship as they ended their lives, as she ended her life in a duel with her cousin. And this creates really a perfect lore opportunity for a kind of downloadable confrontation pack. Now, the problem is here that I think Khalida will probably be one of the Tomb King's starting legendary lords. And as we know, Creative Assembly to date in Total War Warhammer hasn't ever produced pay downloadable content for previously downloadable content. So with the Tomb Kings being a downloadable race pack in itself, you're not going to get a Tomb King lore pack on top of that, I don't believe, in Total War Warhammer 2. So how will we see this conflict play out? Now, that introduced the open idea of Neferata becoming available as a free LC Lord at some point, and you being able to play as her, reintroducing the vampire counts into Total War Warhammer 2 and reigniting this rivalry. But she's not really, Neferata at this point doesn't really live in that part of the Warhammer world. She's kind of moved north in the World's Edge Mountains, more towards Sylvania. But this is a confrontation I'd love to see play out in some way, shape, or form in Total War Warhammer 2. It also brings me to the idea, because a lot of the vampire counts have a lot of characters who have history with the Tomb Kings. And this leads me to the belief that perhaps Nagash might make an appearance in Total War Warhammer 2, as Nagash is essentially the big bad of all undead. Nagash might make an appearance in Total War Warhammer 2 as the big bad, but this is more just like a general discussion thing, sort of going away. I'm going off on a bit of a tangent from this video, but just something I wanted you guys to bear in mind. This is a conflict I hope does play out in the game, and hopefully Neferata is offered to us as some kind of downloadable package. And I just wanted to mention this conflict and the ongoing conflict between some of the older, more famous vampire count characters and the Tomb Kings, and Nagash being tied into that, and how I potentially see him introduced in this game as the big bad. But one unit I will point out that probably should be introduced along with Neferata, if she ever is introduced, is the Coven Throne, which is a chariot unit, kind of similar in structure. As you can see that Games Workshop put it together similar to the Mortis engine, but just with a different kind of top and it has vampiresses on it, and that's very much a Lamian vampire bloodline unit, of which Neferata is the founder, so that would fit quite nicely as a missing unit from the undead armies that would go along with her. And that about sums it up, guys. Sorry if it was a bit long-winded at that point. I tried to be as brief as possible and get through all the options just to lay them out for you. In terms of the lore and a bit more detail on all of this stuff, do check the videos I referenced, do check the description, have a little bit peruse around my playlists, and that will give you a bit more sort of lore and who these characters are and what they're about, and the units as well. But yeah, guys, look forward. I'm kind of looking forward to this DLC already. It's a bit of a silly thing to say, as the game isn't even already out, just willing to dole out my cash. But can't wait to have sort of the complete experience of Total War Warhammer 2. Hope you guys are excited as I am. Let me know if there are any sort of DLC packs you'd like to see. As I said, this wasn't a list of my dream DLC and the lords I want to see. That's why I didn't really cover individuals. I tried to stick very much with Creative Assembly's established pattern of two lords facing off against each other, units being chucked in there, and having a cohesive theme with the DLC packs they put out. And I tried to stick to that and to their and to what their possible thinking might be going forward from here, rather than saying, oh, I want to see this lord, oh, he doesn't tie into any kind of theme, he's an individual lord. And so far we haven't seen them sell individual lord packs, so I just assumed that was slightly unlikely, and so tried to team them up as best I could. Hope you guys understand where I was coming from with that one. But as always, guys, thank you very much for watching. Special thank you to my patrons, John, Reese, Colin, Thomas, and Mateus, and I hope to catch all of you on the next one, guys.